leave comments when we listen to your share, when we download it?
I believe on YouTube.
Are there comments on that share?
On YouTube.
No.
No.
No comment? Nobody's left comment?
It's a female cat.
It's not true. People review them.
YouTube link. They just stream it on the site.
People thumbs up it, but I don't know. It could be the yeshiva has it closed to comments. And like,
What?
Also, even if they didn't close the comments, most people probably just watch it straight on the yeshiva website, not going to YouTube.
So we should all go in and give it a thumbs up so it gets a higher rating.
Actually, I watched it on YouTube last week.
Should I watch it?
I'll do it on YouTube. Thank you, Harvey.
If you get enough people giving you the rating, they might offer you money for putting it out.
okay.
I already do that.
Good morning. Good morning. So we have an exciting share again today, and truly these things are siyata d'shmaya. The fact that some share about the halachic ramifications of digging tunnels somehow went viral. I don't know why.
And this one, right?
Last week's share,
Hamas was watching it.
yeah, last week's share was quite fascinating. We got a lot of feedback, positive feedback on it. So I hope I wasn't foolish in picking this week's topic, but the topic for today, we entitled the share, Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Hashem watches over the fools. And we'd like to give practical applications of this concept here in this week's share.
Is he gonna pass off here?
Okay, everyone's taking these things. The other week, I was in Miami Beach, and I was speaking in a shul, and the Rav was there. So I was making a point of, I was using the example of Moshe Rabbeinu's Chamor, how the Torah changed the perspective of Moshe Rabbeinu really traveled on a Chamor down to Mitzrayim. Well, that was one of the things the Gemara Megillah says, that the Chacham, when they put them in all those separate rooms, and they translated the Torah, they took out all the psukim they changed all the psukim that would be questionable to Judaism. For example, first words in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim. Literally translated, Bereshis created Hashem. So they changed it to, Elokim bara Bereshis. Hashem created the beginning. Nasa Adam, let us make man. Also there.
This is the Septuagint.
Correct. So the Gemara in Megillah goes through all the different psukim they changed. Amongst one of them was the pasuk in last week's parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu came down to Mitzrayim with his family on a donkey. And they changed it. The Gemara says, Lashon Nosef and Adam, it means a camel. Why they changed it? Because can you imagine the leader of the Jewish people? The man's going to perform all the great miracles, and he's just driving an old Camry? It's got to be nothing less than a Lexus.
You mean a Chevy?
Right? Lamaisa, the perception of the difference between yes, our leaders don't have to have a posture of wealth and power. It comes from the Torah that they have. So I was saying that about, they recently the shul chose a Rav. I said they chose wisely. So the Rav is sitting right next to me. He's like, oh, so you compare me to Chamor. I'm like, I wasn't expecting that one.
I mean, I guess that really proves your point.
So it sounds like the audience here feels as if I'm giving a share about Shomer Pisoyim Hashem, somehow it's about them. Hashem watches over the fools. People think I'm talking about them. So please, I'm having this bad streak. Don't think the subjects of my comments are exactly that. What can I do? But I think this is a very, very interesting topic. And I'll first introduce it with really a synopsis of a shir that I listened to from Roy Sharfman. If you go to the yeshiva's list of shirim, the first recorded share of the Rise and Learning share is not Rise and Learning Share number 1.
Rise
not.
and learning. Right.
This share, which is entitled the Rise and Learn Share program, every Sunday morning, the Sunday morning halacha shirim.
It's like the Talmud, it begins with 2.
Right. The first share you'll find on the website is share number 2. What happened to share number 1? You got to ask Harvey. I like Ed's answer that Gemara starts on page 2, right? Which the idea they say behind that. Why does the Gemara start? The first daf is daf beis.
Positive reinforcement.
Right? Well, I see daf yomi's really quick. But I learned way back in yeshiva that my Rebbe said the reason why we start on daf beis is to show when it comes to Gemara, don't think you ever mastered it. You always miss something, even from the beginning. So, yeah, that could be on these shiurim, but shiur number 2, first one you find there, I forgot the exact title, but basically, Rabbi Sharfin talked about cosmetic surgery, bungee jumping, all different types of situations where a person might put himself into sakana. It's called number 2. When a person might put himself into sakana, that is potentially an issue. And these things are quite popular, right? I assume if you check just even here in Florida, how many planes you could parachute out of. You could probably have a smorgasbord of lists, for sure. If you want to drive a little bit.
People pay good money to do that.
Yeah. Skydiving, bungee jumping. There are a lot of thrills. There are a lot of thrills that people are into. And
People this year.
yes. So
This is a very sedate version.
this might touch on the topic. Now, really what I want to do in today's share is speak about one aspect, this concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Just to give you a little synopsis of what Ray Sharfman came out with, I thought it was very interesting. He told a story, you might remember the story, that he got himself, quote unquote, a new van, and that entailed one of his relatives driving that van from New York to Florida. Person comes in, brings a new van, the whole family's all excited, drops in the keys. He's like, it drives very well. I have to warn you, if you go over 100, it starts to shake. So Ray Sharfman said he never had that problem. It drove so easily, smoothly. Yeah, he never went over 100. But he discussed that as halakhically. Is that safe? Is that smart? Or is that foolish to be driving triple digits?
It's
Especially.
illegal.
Oh, shit.
Really.
Our lawyer over here?
That's a different shoot.
Yes.
We already covered that. with traffic.
And Rabbi Sharfman brought up, there's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that talks about if a person puts himself in a dangerous situation, so it takes away potentially from a person's merits, from his chusam. And Rabbi Sharfman warned very well, if you make too many withdrawals, excuse my example, if your wife spends too much on the credit card, at the end of the month, you'll get a statement. And the statement will show you what happened. It doesn't work that way up there. At least down here. Maybe up there.
You can blame our wife.
Right? That's definitely a good excuse. But if a person puts himself in a dangerous situation, you don't get a monthly statement, you just lost out the scar of a year's worth of Shabbosim, Shmir Shabbos. Doesn't work like that. So obviously, a person has to be careful about these things and see what they can do to avoid such situations. That was in general by Sharf's share. Someone before that, the share, sent me a message that they remembered some story. What was it?
People asked about crossing the street when traffic is at a complete standstill and walking in between the other cars.
That sounds relatively benign. The case was what you call, I think they call that over here too, in New York they call it jaywalking, which technically you can get tickets for. I actually saw they just put up new signage here on Miami Gardens Drive, and one of the signs they put up is no jaywalking. I saw that.
Where?
Yeah, over here, in the median. on Land Gardens Drive.
Who would do that?
It's
Huh?
gonna take us all sorts longer for sure.
Not the yeshiva.
I think the authorities.
But, yeah. So, that seemingly is, okay, it's the law, and it's definitely advisable in many situations not to do that. But to say that that's dangerous and takes away from a person's merits, definitely not so simple to say. That was such a quote, supposedly said. Okay. So what I want to do today is I want to analyze one Gemara in particular about how the Gemara applies the concept of putting oneself in sakana versus a concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Hashem watches over the fools. And I think it might have very interesting, and try to get to where Moshe Feinstein is a whole tshuva really based on this idea. Now, my quick perusal and research found there's about 3 or 4 Gemaras in Shas, which talk about the concept called Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Hashem watches over the fools. There's a Gemara later in Yevamos that talks about that a bris milah, when a child has a bris, again, I can't vouch for the scientific data behind this. I'm telling you just what the Gemara says, that there'd be part of what helps a child recover is certain winds, which are normally in the world, and they have a positive effect. Winds. To the extent, the Gemara says, all the years the Jews are in the Midbar, where there weren't those winds, that's why they didn't have a bris. That's why they didn't bring Korban Pesach, because they didn't have that situation. So the Gemara discusses what happens if you know those winds are not around in the world. That's sometimes in the Gemara. Because they still have a bris. And the Gemara relies on Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Hashem watches over people. There's a Gemara in Shabbos that talks about bloodletting, which was a common medical procedure people had in times of the Gemara. And the Gemara talks about there are some days, since it carries with it a certain risk, the Gemara talked about doing it on Mondays and Thursdays, which are days of more rachamim. So the Gemara has a discussion, what about doing it on Erev Shabbos? Sounds like, that'll be a good way to go into Shabbos. Some people go to, the mikvah, to Schwitz, and in the olden days, people got bloodletting. So it's not one of the days that's viewed as safe for bloodletting, according to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, don't worry about it. Even a lot of people do it. Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Once again, Hashem watches over people. The third concept, which we're going to talk about, is the Gemara here in Yevamos. It really talks about birth control. A very interesting discussion. If you look on your sheets, the Gemara begins like 6 lines from the top. Tani Rabibi Kamei Rav Nachman. Shalosh Nosh Meshamshos B'moch. There are 3 women that are allowed to use some type of birth control. Now, I'm going to get to in a moment what exactly that is. But the Gemara says 3 women are allowed to use it. Ktana, Muberes, Minika. Iktana, the Gemara will define what that means in a moment, how old. Muberes, a pregnant lady. And Minika, a nursing lady. The Gemara says Ktana, Shemetis Aver, Shematamas. The Gemara says if we're dealing with a young girl, if she would become pregnant, perhaps that pregnancy could kill her. Muberes, a pregnant woman, Shematasa Uver Sandal. The Gemara talks about a concept that a woman who's already pregnant, there was a fear, at least in the times of the Gemara, that if the husband and wife had relations post that, there create another potential embryo, which would deform the first child already in there. Now, from current science, we don't know of such a thing being able to happen. But this is one of those Gemaras where they have discussions. How do you put together the modern science together with the Gemara's perspective? One of the simplest answers they give is the Gemara is writing based on the scientific understanding they had at that time. The Gemara brings a third case, Menika, Shematigmos Benav Yamas. In those days, they didn't have formula. So if a woman will get pregnant while she's nursing, the could be the child that she's nursing won't have enough milk, won't have enough food, and the child could die. So all of these three are three exceptions where the Rabbanim would allow for birth control. But aside from that, not. The Gemara just then defines the Izi Ktana, Ibas Yudal Shanim Yom Echad, Adil Beishana. It's a period really of 1 year, from 11 to 12. Pachas Bikan, Viosar Akan, Mishmesh B'Kedar Kavalchos. Less than that and more than that, you don't have to worry about it. Divrei Meir. Basically, the understanding by Ktana is less than 11, she wouldn't get pregnant, and therefore there's nothing to worry about. And above 12, we would think that her body's strong enough to keep a pregnancy that we wouldn't jeopardize her. But within that period, the Gemara says, between 11 and 12, that's where there's this issue which would allow for birth control. Now, the Gemara says, okay, I'll stop here for a moment. What exactly is the birth control? Very interesting major machlokas Rashi and Tosas. Rashi understands that the concept of a moch, literally, I think one of my guys looked it up, I think ArtScroll translated as a cotton swab. Gemara's time is a little more primitive. So it was something that a woman put inside her to prevent herself from getting pregnant. That's the definition according to Rashi. And what that would mean, the way Rashi understands the Gemara, is all women besides these three women would be prohibited for them to use birth control. Only these three we would allow. And the issue involving birth control, which is a major issue which is discussed by the poskim, is the concept of hashchasa zera, that a man normally can't waste his zera. And the Torah here would allow for these three women, since there's a sakana involved, that'll be okay to use such a form. Tosos disagrees. Tosos says that sounds like you're really treading on dangerous waters. This is an Isser of Hashchasa Zera, using such a form of birth control. So Tosos says the case is they had regular tashmish, nothing there. Afterwards, the woman wiped away the Zera. That's what we're using a moch for. What I call Plan B. That's the case we're talking about. Now, the way Tosas understands it is that would be really permitted for everybody. Halacha l'maitz, we don't pass them like this. The Tosas' perspective is really that be permitted for everybody. Just here, these three women, it's an obligation to do that. That's how Tosas learned. Really, Tosas is based on the fact that a woman doesn't have an Isser. She doesn't have, if she would just wipe away, by her, that's not any violation, because Tosas understands that the Isser of Hashchasa Zera is dependent on the mitzvah of Puruvu. And since she doesn't have a mitzvah of Puruvu, the mitzvah of having children is on the man, easy to say, he doesn't have to carry the baby for 9 months. But the Torah's perspective is the mitzvah is on the man. So the Isser of Hashchasa Zera is tied to that. So therefore, there'd be nothing wrong with a woman, Plan B, getting rid of the Zera. And Tosas reads the Gemara that these three women have to do this.
Isn't that still wasting the Zera?
So, from both perspectives, Tosas looks at it. The man, look what he did. He did a normal action. He didn't do anything wrong. The woman is disposing of it, but she doesn't have an Isser on that. The Isser of Hashchasa Zera, according to Tosas, is tied together with the mitzvah of Puruvu. So if she doesn't have Puruvu, she doesn't have an Isser of Hashchasa Zera. Fascinating. Now, that's the background of the Gemara. One more step. Comes along the Chachamim, last lines in the Gemara. Chachamim omrim, achazu v'achazu. All these cases, a regular woman, one of these three women, mishameshes kedarka v'holchos. No, they have regular relations. U'min hashamayim yirachmu. And min hashamayim, they have rachmanos on her that she won't become pregnant. Mishum shenemar, Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Hashem watches over people. Okay, that's the Gemara. I found the Ritva on this Gemara. There's another Rishon, Ra'ah and Ksubis, asks a very strong question. According to Rameir would say there's permissibility, according to Rashi, or even more so, there's an obligation, according to Tosas, for a person to use birth control by these three women. Comes a Chachamim, the Chachamim say, you know what?
Nourishment.
Don't do it. Do not use it, seemingly. Rely on Hashem. Ask the Ritva, where do we find such a thing in Yiddishkeit? One of the most basic principles is the concept of hishtapos, that a person has to do things. You can't just say, oh, I rely on Hashem. Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Here, the Gemara sounds like even l'chachila, even first choice. Just sit back. Don't do anything. Hashem will take care. Isn't one of the basic concepts we know is a person has to do their hishtapos. So if you have a situation over here, which is a potential sakana, so Rav Meir says, okay, we have a plan. Either plan A or plan B, or we have a plan. Chacham say, forget about it. You don't need a plan. He'll take care. Seems to go against everything we know. Yes.
Talking about two totally different things. And the Ravidi is talking about three different women who maybe have a situation of sakana nefashos. Pisoyim are just people who do stupid things, foolish things.
Yeah,
different things.
The Gemara's quoting that pasuk. You're right. Right? What's being brought up is, I was careful when I translated it last. I didn't use the word fools, because I wouldn't necessarily call these people foolish. Right? This is a regular married couple. It happens to be they're pregnant. Fine, so it'll be dangerous. She's nursing, it'll be dangerous. She's a tana, assuming that's allowed, right?
And therefore, there's a whole separate genre of halacha for people who are in sakana.
So the Gemara is using a different terminology. The Gemara is not just saying pikuach nefesh is docha. The Gemara here is using a concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem, which says Hashem watches the fools and everyone below that, or above that, whichever way you categorize it.
So in other words, it's saying if Hashem is watching out for people who do reckless things,
certainly, correct. But the Ritva's question is a very strong question. How do you understand what's going on over here? What about Hishtavos? So the Ritva personally gives an answer which needs more explanation. He says, oh, this is a proof. You have to go, the Ritva goes like Tosos versus Rashi. That on a plan B birth control, there we said it's permitted for everyone to use. Just the Rameir is saying it's an obligation for these three people to do it. To which the Chacham would be arguing on that basis. Chachamim are saying, look, of course we understand you could use birth control. No, you could. The question is, am I obligated to do that? So Rav Meir said, yeah, sure, you're obligated, because these three people have sakana. To which you're going to, the Chacham are going to argue back, no. You could if you want, but you know what? You could also rely on Hashem. You have two choices. That answers the question, but simply not fully, because the Gemara is still saying, l'chachila, you're allowed to do this. How do you understand that? So what I found some Mepharshim speak out in this Gemara is you have to add one other point to the equation. Sorry, you have to say it. Is that the chashashim the Gemara was talking about, the chashash sakana, is a relatively small chashash. There's a small chance. So in a situation where there's a small chance of something going wrong, that's where you can have a debate. Let's say in the Ritva's world. But there's a small chance something's going to go wrong. Do you still say, okay, but you must take preventive action? You must use birth control? That's the opinion of Rameir. Well, the Chachamim is saying, no, if there's a small chance of something going wrong, Shomer Pisoyim Hashem, you could go about your business without doing that. That would be, I believe, the way most people explain the Ritva, explain this Gemara. Yes,
How would you define a small chance? Less than 50%?
that's an excellent question. And I think that's the big deal. So I want to go to Moshe Feinstein. And I think in this particular case, sometimes I'll quote line for line, different parts out. I think it's very kedai to read this whole piece. Fascinating, and you get appreciation of Moshe Feinstein. Look, we'll see by the time he finishes tshuva if I could explain it or not. I'm not sure. But it's always good when you see a question posed, you start from the top. Isser Chag Shavuos Tavshin Mem Aleph. What year is that? Basically 1979, 1980. Yeah. So this is going back quite a few years ago, over 40 years ago. He writes this, Yedidi HaNichva Ma'od Ben Torah V'Yir Shemayim Be'emes, a true Ben Torah and Yir Shemayim, Dr. Meir Rosner. Okay, and the question posed, is there an isser to smoke cigarettes? That was a question posed over 40 years ago to Moshe Feinstein. Now look how he deals with such a question.
He's asking Bachlal. He's not even asking. He's not asking Yom. He's asking.
Correct. He's asking
Straight
in
out.
general,
Straight out.
is there an isser for a Jew to smoke a cigarette? In modern terms, to vape. So, okay. Now, before we even begin doing the tshuva, I'll give them the big disclaimer, being the fact that this tshuva was written over 40 years ago. Obviously, the data and the science that we know today is different than 40 years ago. Right? The same way in the Gemara itself, we talked about, okay, it could be the science changed in the times of the Gemara. We can apply the same logic potentially to this tshuva. Things have changed. And I have heard quotes from Moshe's children, what Moshe would say if he was asked a question today. Well, let's first read this fundamental piece. He says, Hine litin klal lahada amru shomer Pisoyim Hashem. I want to give a general rule to that which the Gemara says, shomer Pisoyim Hashem, exactly what we're learning. He quotes Gemara Shabbos and Nida. The Gemara Nida is the same Gemara, basically, as we have in Yavamas. He writes, so he paraphrases these Gemaras are cases where there's a chashash sakana. In general, people, for sure, the Gemara in Shabbos talked about, people do bloodletting on Friday. It's dashbei rabin. People are involved in doing it. So that's how he grips the situation. Normally, when there's a chashash of something bad happened to a person, you can't rely on this. Let's say there's something that's really dangerous, just people don't care about it. So Moshe says it's not so simple just to rely. Look, people don't care about it. There's something dangerous, people just don't care. Near Pashad, the bedaver the ikar harbe shlo kasher uhul b'yusam klum, something which for many people it doesn't hurt them at all. Now look at his examples. You go and harbe mine ochlim. She'in shinen nenem biyoser kibasar shmena, like nice fat meat. Dvarm charifim biyofer, things which are very sharp. We know a good corned beef sandwich could do some trouble inside. So what do we say about that? There is no isser to eat those foods because of a chashash sakana. Most people don't die from this. Are not sakana from this. Right? I was recently in someone's house for Shabbos. The person happened to be a cancer doctor. So he couldn't find soda in their house. So the wife said, they're convinced that soda is dangerous. They won't keep that. I would say, or Moshe's application from fatty meats, I don't think soda is worse than fatty meats. Unless someone could show me data. But the same thing, like, it's very hard to put an isser on foods because, you have theories, there are ideas. by fatty meats, I'm sure there's more than theories. There's data. People die from these things. But at the same time, Rav Moshe says it's hard to say there's an isser to eat it. And then he brings the Rambam in Hilchos Deos. Talks about in Yoni Ochel Mashkem Atovim Brios Agov. The Rambam talks about things which are good for a person's body. So, modern times, I think I've seen some English books where people write whole, nutrition theories based on the Rambam. I wonder if they saw this tshuva. Or Moshe goes and analyzes the Rambam. He writes, "Lo kosher b'losin iser lo midiraisa v'lo minabanam sham asur chachamim. Kidakasiv basar's nichshel yish basagonis afashos hilchos rotzeach." He says, look at the Rambam's language. Yeah, those Rosh Hashanahs are Perak Yud Aleph and Hilchos Rotzeach Halacha Daled. That he says the Rambam is very exact in his language. He doesn't say anything over there when he talks about the foods you shouldn't eat. The Rambam gives a whole, nutritional advice. Where Moshe takes it just as that. It's just advice. This is not an Issur D'Oraisa. This is not an Issur D'Rabbanan. That's how you read these things. And normally with this Chashas Sakana, the rabbis answer these things. Fine. I'm skipping towards the top of the next page. Coffee's right. I'll start from the end of the first line. V'hum yishum da'al kol devar me'ila shapart osam lo shaykh lo osam mamish. The Rambam can't answer all these foods that he speaks negatively against. Most of them, it's just pleasurable foods, ruba de inchi, and most people, lo mazak lo klum, doesn't damage them, doesn't hurt them. V'ikar harbi mehem, she'efshar lahizar buhu, laharbi inchi, she'treat panasasam. Right? This is practically, there's so many people, if you're stuck traveling, you have to buy packaged meals, which are full of sodium. He gives another case, let's say a person's a poor person, you eat what you get. You can't be so picky. I'm on the, carbs, gluten diet. Sorry, buddy. Doesn't work. Now, skipping to right by the period, parallel to the beginning of the tshuva on the other side. Okay? So far, in terms of food, he for sure says these things aren't usher, and these things you would have the concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Hashem watches over people. You could eat it. Now, if your doctor tells you, okay, your health is bad and you shouldn't have X, Y, and Z food, that's different. That's not what Moshe is talking about. What Moshe is talking about, in general, do I have to refrain from these foods because there's a chance something bad might happen. However, Dami Ishan's cigarettes. To cases like this, that's what I compare cigarettes to. People get pleasure from it. Ma'od. Umitzarin kishein cigarettes. Odios mechazar mini ochem tovim. People who miss their cigarettes, they miss it more than missing out on good food. Obviously, Moshe is already getting to the element that cigarettes were addictive. I don't know that 40 years ago they knew exactly how addictive. That was pre the lawsuits that proved how addictive they were. The Moshe's writing, important line, 40 years ago, again, provided with the data that he got from people, is the effects of cigarettes was still viewed as a miyat kata. The koshin lichlas mizeh besartin, you get cancer. Uvod machalos mesukanos, ukata biyoser. And he says, the af that you, Dr. Rosner, raw harbi cholim. He says, okay, look, you're a doctor, you're working in the hospitals. And you're seeing every day, of course, people with throat cancer and lung cancer. And he says, not just in your hospital, I'm sure it's true in all the other hospitals. There are many people sick with cancer. Makalmata Marine, the last 4 lines of that paragraph. If you take together all the people currently in the hospital sick for cancer, sick for over cigarettes, and even all the people who haven't come to the doctor, if you measure the numbers from everyone in the world, that would still halachically qualify as a miyat, as a minority. Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. And a chash like that, a small number, we would say this concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Now, what he sounds like he's saying here is pretty major. That now, again, we could debate even back then what exactly the numbers were. That was one of the things I actually wanted to do, if I had a chance to do. The share prep is a source of people here might have easier access to find them. I'm trying to find them. What were this, again, 1979, 1980? 81.
Cast the
Right.
Surgeon General.
Right. But the question is, halachically speaking, what were the numbers? Rav Moshe views that as a miyat. Halachically speaking, that's a miyat. We'll hack exactly the numbers. Well, let's say the numbers were 10% of people that smoke die from smoking. That's a miyat. 10% is a miyat. And to say that everyone is usher from that, what's the numbers of people that die from red meat? Probably not 10%. I don't know. Probably less than that. But halachically, that would fit into the same category. That, look, different things affect people's bodies differently. There are overriding factors. People can have schusim. Okay? That's really Rabbi Sharfman saying, don't put yourself in a makom sakana. But Rav Moshe, at least on the data that it was said then, viewed this as a concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem.
When would you say it's not a need?
Yeah, so very good question. The question was asked, when would Rav Moshe say it's not a miyat? So I have heard b'shem Rav Moshe Feinstein's sons, including Rav Feinstein Shlita, that today Rav Moshe would say it's also flat out because of the numbers. So I don't know that difference in numbers. I can't speak from a medical perspective exactly what switched in the understanding of the stats of people dying from smoking. But I have heard that the numbers changed enough that the family feels emotion would say different today. But I'll take questions in a moment. But the point I'm bringing out from here is as long as something is what you would classify as a miyat, then you apply the concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. That is the understanding that we walked away from the Gemara. It's pretty cool. That's the way we understood the Gemara. How did the Chachamim come out and say, don't involve yourself in birth control? Rely on Hashem. Sounds like even l'chachila. Teretz is, it has to come with the fact there's a miyat. You can rely, if the sakana itself was only limited to being a small amount, there is a concept Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Now let me just read one more step, and then I'll take questions. He writes, Avovadi min aroi, l'chol ish v'prat l'nei Torah. Don't think this is the end of what Moshe says. To all people, and specifically b'nei Torah, shol lashan, people should not smoke. Me'ach v'shu chshas sakana. He plays both sides. There still is a chshash. You shouldn't do such a thing. Ve'ein b'zeh shum to'eles, the gamanola ilo shol hirgu b'zeh. It's not even a hana for people to start. And this is the dichotomy. But once you started, okay, there's a hana, and it's very hard to hold back from it. But to start, right now there's no hana. You're coughing the first 10 times. A person shouldn't get involved in this. Don't let young kids get involved in this. Even if you yourself are a smoker. Moshe says, even if you put aside the sakana, you still shouldn't do it because you're indulging in a certain addictive taiva behavior. Signed, Rav Moshe Feinstein.
Just because it's mutter doesn't mean you should be doing it.
Yes.
I believe this may have been the Jew, and I heard this from somebody who knew, it may have been Mordechai Tendler, but I'm not sure, who said that he really he wanted to usher smoking. He knew that it was dangerous, like the last paragraph says, but he didn't because he knew that, as he referenced above, he knew it was addictive also. He knew that people wouldn't stop smoking just because he said so, and all that he would do was create a new category of what they were doing.
Yes, that could be. No, it's really these Gemaras themselves, the starting point for especially that Gemara I mentioned about bloodletting, Gemara and Shabbos, is there was a situation where people were doing it anyway. It was Dashpei Rabbin.
What does that mean, bloodletting? I can't picture what it is.
Bloodletting?
Basically give you a cut to drain some blood.
This is leeches to do.
Oh, there's a sub
Leeches
Blood.
on the bottom.
Oh,
They
they
might-
thought it was
And also,
beneficial.
they also have these flints.
purpose.
Yes. They thought it was healthy, right? But these situations are, are situations which are very tricky. And the Rabbanim viewed, hey, if people are doing it anyway, this is not a battle to fight. There is a concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Hashem watches over people. And even if they're doing something foolish, right? This is potential sakana. But since the numbers are small, in such a scenario, you can't say that that's awesome. Should you avoid it? Sure. If your doctor tells you to do it, you have to refrain from that? Yes. That's different.
All
But-
doctors will tell you
yeah.
not to smoke.
But this gives, people ask me, you started with skydiving, bungee jumping. People should listen to that share, listen to this share. This really coming from two different perspectives. But from judging Shomer Pisoyim Hashem, if the numbers are relatively small of people dying from skydiving accidents, people die from roller coasters. Hey, should you say, I can't go on a roller coaster? No. Seemingly the same thing. Everybody goes on roller coasters. There's a heter. Could a person go skiing? This all is very, very relevant discussion. This concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem seems to give a heter for all these things, assuming the consequences are not crazy. The stats in general are good for skydiving, but when you go in Bulgaria, the stats are not exactly the same as if you go in America. Okay? Take that
So
into
like
account.
if you do what's called base jumping. Okay, base jumping is jumping with a parachute off the top of a building or off a bridge or something. It's only a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to get killed.
Only 1 in 10?
Only one.
No, but what about getting very injured?
Yeah, I know, but yeah.
Subway surfing.
I mean, that's probably what changed.
That's a big deal in New York.
That
Oh,
gets
yeah.
you killed.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Huh?
What is that?
That. This nice guy from Michigan. You don't know all the city slicker stuff.
No, I don't.
Is you jump between two cars of a subway train.
No, that's not it. It's riding on the top of the subway.
Oh, it's even on top.
Riding on top of the
Oh,
car.
excuse me.
Yeah.
There's just enough space you can stay standing.
They jump in the water in the winter.
But
Yeah.
I assume Ruve would be saying Ramos's
Yes.
answer would change because it's not just about death. It's about, there's sakana. A person could just be sick for 20 years.
Yes.
What about some technologies? Okay, flying. Is that also, I think it's dangerous.
Flying what?
Michigan State.
Being a pilot or being flying
Being a
airplane?
passenger on
That's fine.
That's dangerous.
Right. Right. Good look at the example. Right.
You know it's dangerous going to Yankee Stadium and rooting for the Red Sox.
Yes. Yeah. That's really foolish.
That's more than 50%.
Yeah. This is true. It's not a joke. I think someone just shot outside of Miami Dolphin
It
Stadium.
happens all the time.
Yeah. Right. But in general, I think it gives us like a perspective that, of course, I think we should all aim to be responsible and do things which are, fit our mode of the best responsible ways we could act with our health, with our choices. But I think a share like this does provide a perspective. A lot of times you see people that are not living life on the standard of safety that you would think is good for yourself, good for your children. And, if it was up to you, you tell them off, hey, what are you doing with your kids? You should know there's what to rely on. There's a concept of Shomer Pisoyim Hashem. Okay, maybe you wouldn't do that yourself, but there is a halachic basis, as long as it's not beyond the miyat, to allow for actions and behaviors which may not fit the goody-goody 100% line of safety and still be motor min haTorah. Thank you very much for listening. Have a wonderful week.
Even by
Yes.
organ donors, I
Yes.
remember Rabbi Sharfin Zatzal gave the shir. It wasn't so posh. I think it's even a das yachid we rely on
Yeah.
to do it, because